Welcome to No Apologies. I'm Dana Lash. It's only been 5 months, and the uniter-in-chief, President Biden, and the party of love and unity, his party, the Democrats, seem to suddenly have a problem on their hands. More and more, the people that they say are trying to, that they're trying to help, are actually rejecting the help that the Democrats are offering. I'm talking about so-called marginalized groups, Black Americans, immigrants, and especially the Hispanic community. Now, there are signs that the patient is rejecting the Democrat medicine, or is even a patient at all, a cocktail of racial division and authoritarian big government. A recent article from The Intercept caught my attention this morning. The detail that caught my eye specifically was in the tweet that they promoted the Peas with, saying that parents who are fighting CRT in schools, that they are, quote, mostly white. Now, I'm surprised at the candor from left-wing Intercept, because indeed it does appear that many of the parents fighting CRT are not actually white at all. I know that they were referencing Georgia. Maybe most of the parents in Georgia fighting it are white, but that's definitely not a universal statement, and it doesn't describe most of the parents that have been speaking out about this. In fact, here's a clip that made the rounds just this weekend of a mother who identifies as Muslim, Tatiana Ibrahim in New York, and she's speaking to the school board. Her daughter goes to school there. She's speaking out against CRT. Watch what she says.
You work for me. I don't work for you. You have a duty. We are entrusting our children to you. We teach our children morals, values when they grow up to commit crimes and end up in prison and kill a police officer. It's our fault? No, it's your fault. You're emotionally abusing our children and mentally abusing them. You're demoralizing them by teaching them communist values. This is still America, ma'am.
Ooh, and there are many other examples of parents like Asra Nomani, who's been on my radio program, members of so-called marginalized groups pushing back against critical race theory, a Marxist theory. It is absolutely a Marxist theory. It is from Marxism. It is an offshoot of critical theory, and it's endorsed by the Biden administration. All across the country, parents are speaking out. But this is just the tip of the iceberg on a bigger problem for Democrats who constantly hustle race, because other cracks are also appearing in the Democrat Party's efforts to hold on to minority groups that traditionally in the past have voted blue. It appears that America's Hispanic community is beginning to defect, so to speak, from the Democrat Party. So some evidence of this trend that is very worrisome for Democrats that's emerging all around the country. So, for instance, this just happened. NRO has actually a new survey that's out. They say of the survey, and this is specifically referencing, this is actually Texas that came from the election in 2020, and then still surveys now are signaling this. Republicans swept key races for mayor in Texas on Saturday, setting back Democratic hopes that the state's urban areas will deliver statewide majorities for them in the future. Now, this was from the 2020 election, sidebar to this, but in McAllen, Texas, for instance, this is a border city. They say of 150,000 people, 85% are Hispanic, and they elected their first mayor since 1997. And this is a border city, 85% Hispanic, that elected a Republican mayor. And in fact, when you looked at the raw data coming from the Secretary of State's site that looked at Democrat voters and how people are, or looked at voters, period, and looked at how they voted Democrat or Republican or how they were registered, there were a lot of Hispanic Americans that began trending towards the GOP side. I wonder if Democrats' open border policy is popular with Hispanic Americans, because it doesn't look like it. And according to Washington Examiner, for former President Trump, he flipped five Hispanic majority Texas counties last November. In Zepeda County, which is 94% Hispanic, Trump doubled the number of votes that he received. That county has not been won by a Republican presidential candidate since the 1920 election. Trump also flipped Kennedy County, where he lost by 8 points in 2016. He also won the county by 32 points 4 years later. Democrats, it seems, are beginning to lose Hispanics in California, too. This past election, Democrats pulled out all the stops. They spent millions of dollars to pass Prop 16. This is a bill that would have institutionalized racial discrimination by allowing employers to consider and actually think first about race in hiring. It was roundly rejected by the state of California, losing by 14 points. Every single Hispanic county in California rejected Prop 16. The National Republican Senatorial Committee, NRSC, released a new poll of Hispanic voters in 2022 Senate battleground states. And the survey found that Hispanic voters value capitalism over socialism. Not a real surprise, but not a good sign for Democrats. And the poll also discovered that Hispanic voters believe too many people are living off the government's dime, and they worry that their children are not going to have opportunities in the United States if our nation continues down the Democrats' preferred path. Houston seems like we got a problem for Democrats, and I don't mean just in the city also. It's in critical swing states, and in Texas you see this. Florida particularly, where Hispanic voters are saying no, absolutely not to the Democrat Party. So what is going on? Well, here's what Senator Marco Rubio had to say as to why so many Hispanic voters rejected Democrats in the 2020 election. Watch.
I think the future of the Republican Party is a multi-ethnic, multiracial, working class party. And what I mean by working class party are normal, hardworking, everyday people that don't want to live in a city where there's no police department, where people rampage through the streets every time they're upset about something, where their kids are afraid that they're going to fail a college course because unless they agree with their crazy professor, where they're afraid to speak out on what they believe on some issue because they might get fired from their job, where they're going to be called a racist because they wear a MAGA hat or have a sticker on their car.
I mean, should the Democrat Party really be surprised by the defection of Hispanic voters? Did the Democrat Party think that Hispanic people immigrated to America to vote for the same policies that were occurring in the countries that they were leaving? Republican Texas candidate Monica de la Cruz Hernandez, who is challenging Democrat Texas Representative Vicente Gonzalez in next year's race, she gives us some insight into the seismic shift that is occurring. So according to a Daily Caller article, de la Cruz Hernandez says that she was first registered as a Democrat, but then later switched to the Republican Party because she said her values changed. She added this about why she shifted to becoming a Republican, saying, quote, "I grew up as a strong Catholic. This area has strong Catholic roots today, Christian roots. Being pro-life and pro-God was very important to me as an individual. And my family is a family that has served its country. My grandfather served in World War II and in the United States Navy, and my brother served 20 years honorably in the United States Air Force. I saw that the Democrat Party was just moving quickly to the left and towards socialism. And those just did not align with my values any longer," end quote. So as it turns out, Hispanic Americans might just be that constituency that breaks the Democrat Party because they're pro-family, they're pro-life, they're pro-hard work, they appreciate infinite opportunities America has to offer, and they also reject the thought process that the only way that you can be lifted out of your status in life is if the government does it for you. No, they reject that. And because, unlike so many ungrateful Americans on the left today, they understand what it means to even have opportunity. Because so many people who immigrate to the country and become part of the big O American family, they are coming from countries that have long embraced socialistic policies, that have bankrupted those sovereign nations. They've seen the desperation of people trying to flee communist Venezuela. They've experienced the corruption of drug money and the cartel control that has had on parts of government in Mexico. They've boarded leaky boats and crossed the open ocean from Cuba for the chance at the American dream. And these are people who are willing to risk dying to get to America. And once they're here, many serve in our military and have died fighting for America. They don't believe that the Democrat Party, their libelous lies, that this is a white supremacist nation. And they don't believe that their color or ethnicity should be a hurdle for them succeeding. And that's why so many come to the United States, wave after wave of people since the beginning of this country. And once they arrive, they quickly rise. They become entrepreneurs, mayors, members of Congress, and they get that reward for their belief and effort and civic participation in the American system. And while the left, who now dominates the Democrat Party, they're busy tearing down America. And Hispanics are the latest group of people that are busy building up the country as opposed to tearing it down like socialists that they see on the left, with the same ingredients that have made every generation of immigrants rise into the middle class and even into the stratosphere. And those ingredients are hard work, family, freedom, belief in God, and reliance, being reliant on oneself, realizing that life is an employer. What you put into it is what you get out of it. And no group demonstrates a better love of these values than American Hispanics. We're a nation of immigrants, unlike any that the world has ever known. You know, there's this saying that you can go to France and become French, you can go to Italy and become Italian, or you can't become Italian, you can't become French. You can go to Spain, but you can never become Spanish. You can go to Greece and you can never become Greek, right? But you can come to the United States and you can be American. The great experiment from where so many people, it's e pluribus unum, where one people who believe in freedom, limited government, and the possibility of the individual. The combinations of cultures, the cultural appreciation and ideas, like our Hispanic community who embrace the American idea. That's made us the envy of the entire planet, allowing us to continue to lead in technology and culture. There's nothing like it in the world. And now we see the Hispanic community is growing in number and political power. And it turns out, if the Hispanic people want a revolution in America, it's not the one that the left's offering. They've seen that version of revolution. They've seen that before. They've been down that road and they know that it's a utopian pipe dream. Only the elite Democrats and the white trust fund socialists want a socialist revolution, like the Castro kind of Cuba, Chavez and Maduro, Venezuela. The Democrats, they want socialism so they can consolidate their power and rule over other people. Now, speaking of Venezuela, that once thriving Latin nation has descended into abject poverty. The Venezuelan currency, the bolivar, is so worthless. People take the currency and they use it as cloth to make handbags and wallets. And meanwhile, this is how big old man of the people, Nicolas Maduro, the president of Venezuela himself, lives. Here he is. He's eating dinner by the world-famous Salt Bay in an overpriced restaurant. That guy, Salt Bay, by the way, received a lot of criticism for this video. A lot of criticism for this video. Being in the ruling party in a socialist, really it's a Marxist country, is a really good gig if you can get it. And that's communism in a nutshell. Socialism is just a stepping stone. In the end, it's all trash. The elite eat steak while the people eat dirt. Hispanic Americans, they've seen what happens. And they do not intend on seeing that here in the United States. And they're not looking for more government. They're looking for a government that just gets out of the way so they can set their work ethic and creativity loose. And more minority groups like Hispanic Americans are waking up to that, to the fact that the Democrats are the anti-freedom, anti-family, I mean, they literally did take God out of the pledge, an anti-American party. The party of the elites, the limousine liberals, the trust fund socialists, the party of big tech, big corporations, big government, and big Marxism. And so Hispanic Americans are turning away from Democrats, along with the working class. Now, this is a huge win for the Republican Party that has built a massive coalition, and it's a big win for America. Up next, Nicole Solas. She's a parent that is one of many now across the country fighting against critical race theory, and she's in Rhode Island. Now, when she attempted to get the school board to answer simple questions as to how racial theory and gender issues are presented in class based on what a principal said to her, the school board, they actually just met because they were deciding whether or not they wanted to sue her. We have the latest, and we'll talk with her next. Keep it here. Black Rifle Coffee Company is a veteran-owned coffee company serving premium coffee to people who love America. Veteran CEO and founder Evan Hafer spent over 7 years on the ground overseas with U.S. Special Forces and as a CIA contractor. Black Rifle Coffee is committed to Evan's mission of supporting veteran, law enforcement, and first responder causes. And this summer, Black Rifle Coffee Company invites you to enjoy your coffee. And by that, they don't just mean the great taste, but the places you drink it, where you go, what it fuels and inspires, but really just, the simple morning and the great cup of coffee to start your day. So whether you're brewing the perfect cup of coffee to get your day started, or cracking a can of 300 open on your next backcountry mission, Black Rifle Coffee is here to fuel your way wherever the summer takes you. So head to blackriflecoffee.com/DanaTV to order yours. Use code DanaTV at checkout for 20% off your purchase and your first coffee club order. Fuel your summer with America's coffee. Black Rifle Coffee. Welcome back. We're happy to have Nicole Solas join us. She is a parent who was, this is just mind-numbingly insane, threatened by her school board with a lawsuit simply because she requested public records, as every parent has a right to, regarding her child's school curriculum. She's here with the latest on what is happening in her Rhode Island school and her fight against critical race theory. Nicole, it's good to see you. Welcome to the program.
Hi, Dana. Thanks for having me.
So as I understand it, the school board met to determine whether or not they were actually going to sue you because you were filing public information requests just to get some basic information as to how racial and gender theory was being presented in school, because now this is not even something that's high school. This is down to like kindergarten. From what I understand, that's what your child is going into. I mean, this is going into elementary school. And this was all just because, again, public information requests. What was the result of that meeting, and what did they ultimately determine from that?
Well, the good news is that the meeting was a real victory for parents. I had a lot of supporters show up from other states, other towns. I had people across the country telling me that they were going to watch this school committee meeting and support me, which was just so moving and overwhelming. I'm so grateful for that support. And I think it was really that presence and support from across the country that ultimately put enough pressure on the school committee to vote not to sue me for submitting a lot of public records requests.
And that's, I mean, I'm just shocked that was even a consideration. And this school district, because and you explained it really, really well. I read a piece that you had written, and you described how in the very beginning when you were submitting this request, you learned super fast that the smaller and the more narrow you can make it, the more affordable it can become. Because I don't think people realize, talk a little bit about that, because I would imagine that when you first get started and you see exactly what goes in with these public information requests, that's a hurdle to a lot of parents.
Right, yeah, and the request that you're talking about in particular was a request I made for the emails of a school committee member. And that originally came back as estimated to be $9,700 approximately. And of course, no one can afford that to get public information. So when I narrowed the scope of that request to just 6 months worth of emails, and then I requested digital copies instead of hard copies, that estimate went down to $79.50. I know of another parent in another district who had requested information about the cost of building a new athletic field, and his estimate was in the ballpark of $17,000 to get this public information. So I learned that by requesting less public information at a time, it would cost me much less money. In some cases, documents were even free. They would just, send it to me without an estimate. And, I was told by the principal that given the scope of my questions, how many I had, it was best for me to submit public records requests. So I was in contact with them the whole time. I would submit a request. They would respond with an estimate. I had no notice that this was difficult for them. And then one morning I woke up to see that there's a new school committee meeting scheduled, and my name is on the agenda saying that they were going to have an open and public meeting to discuss bringing a lawsuit against me for doing what they told me to do. So I felt very targeted. It was very scary. I had never been to a school committee meeting before in person, so I really couldn't believe that the first one that I was going to be about me.
What a way to find that out, and to bring everyone up to speed as to how this even began. This just happened because of an offhand kind of remark, as I understand it, from the principal of your child's school, and they said that they don't refer to boys and girls in class as boys and girls, and that got you to thinking, okay, wait a minute, what's going to be actually presented in class?
Exactly. I had just enrolled my daughter in kindergarten, and so I called the principal to talk about the school. And when I asked if they did any lessons or any kind of integration with gender theory or CRT, I learned that they have a practice of not calling the children boys and girls, of refraining from using gender terminology. She also told me that they embed ideals of gender identity into lessons, and I couldn't get clear answers about what exactly that meant. And parents want to know exactly what is going on. It's very confusing to hear that they're doing something with embedding ideals or values of something. parents want to know exactly what that is. And parents want to know exactly what that is because we want to exercise our right to opt out of material that we find objectionable. I also wanted a tour of the school. I wanted to see the curriculum. I couldn't get a tour, and I was told in order to obtain the curriculum to submit a public records request. So again, I was doing everything they told me to do, and this sort of became a situation that I never anticipated it would become.
And then you begin filing those records requests, and then you wake up and you see that your name is listed as a topic of discussion in a school committee meeting. That had to feel, and I know you did say that you felt targeted, that seems like it was an intimidation tactic, and not just towards you, but kind of as a sign towards any other parents that might be interested in joining you or filing their own records request to maybe not do that because you might get sued by the school too.
Yes, I think that it would certainly have a chilling effect, which is why I felt really compelled to be vocal about this. I didn't want this meeting to happen without me there. I didn't want it to happen without a lot of supportive people saying that they weren't going to tolerate this kind of targeting. And, you know, if you saw a video of the meeting, it was almost 5 hours long, and the majority of it was all about me and the requests that I submitted. And it really felt like I was on trial by my school committee for submitting these public records requests.
What they told you to do.
But which they told me to do, exactly.
Unbelievable. I read this one quote from a piece where they were talking about some of the committee members that were arguing, because I kept thinking, what in the world could the basis of their claim against you even be? And they were trying to suggest that it was an intimidation tactic in opposition to gender inclusive and quote unquote anti-racism policies, which I didn't think that simply as a taxpayer and as a parent with a child who is going to be in that district. That just sounds like a parent who's wanting a little insight as to what is going to be happening in your child's classroom. How was that intimidation? How do you answer something like that?
Well, you know, you can't question a parent's motives when they're asking for information and when they're doing what you ask them to do. And, you know, it's no secret that a lot of parents oppose CRT, and the reason why they're just trying to get information on it is to see if it's really in the school. So, you know, if we're going to continue singling out parents who ask for information and making it seem like they are victimizing the school for not getting information which they're entitled to, that to me strikes me as just perpetuating this bullying of parents who are asking for information.
Yeah, in our town, we had a huge fight against CRT being implemented and without and also taxpayer money being reallocated towards some of the curriculum and new positions and all of that. And one of the parents who ended up becoming quite vocal about this in the very beginning was worried and said, I'm concerned that they may try to target my child more because his mother speaks out. And it seemed, I know that she wasn't the only parent who felt that way. Is that something that you worry about and that you hear from other parents, that because, and you're not even criticizing, you're just asking for information, that are you worried about whether or not your child, your student at the school might actually be looked at differently by the staff?
Yeah. I mean, after what happened to me in such a public manner, I'm really scared that my daughter could be targeted simply because of the way that I've spoken out. So really at a standstill in terms of that. And it's very scary that could happen and that, you know, it could affect my kids.
And that's awful. That's awful for a parent to have to think about and to be concerned over. I love that you said that you'd received so much support and people who came and watched that and attended that even from out of state. And obviously, I would imagine that you're hearing from a number of parents in your school district as well, who after they saw you speak out decided, okay, we need to get a hold of Nicole and talk to her back channel about this because she's right and we want to join this effort. So I hope that you kind of have a team with you now.
I have a big group of support. Every day, someone new reaches out to me. Sometimes it's even, you know, someone that I went to school with in 5th grade or, you know, reaching out to me. So the support has been way, way more than any criticism that I've received. So I don't regret doing this. And I think it's only going to have positive effects for our kids in school to make sure that they get an education that is free from indoctrination and sectarianism.
A last question for you, Nicole. What would you say to parents who are in your position and they want to get more information, but they're scared because, you know, they see some of the blowback that comes with that? What encouragement, either in pushing back against that or just the process in general, would you have? Any kind of advice that you would have for parents who want to do this within their district too?
I really encourage parents to do it, and I know it's scary to be retaliated against, but you have to remember that you're the only one that will fight for your kid. And any retaliation you get is overcomable. The risk of retaliation is worth it to protect your children. You can file these APRA requests. It stands for Access to Public Records Act, to get the information that you may not be getting when you ask your school leadership questions. I believe there is a way to do it anonymously. So if that's an option for parents, start getting involved, I think that they should take advantage of that. And I also want parents to remember that our school leadership is our civil servants. They work for us. It is not supposed to be this way with them acting like tyrants and withholding information or not giving you meaningful answers. So just remember that we are the ones that are entitled to the information, and our kids are worth it.
There you go. Nicole Solas, thank you so much for your fight in your area, because I know it's inspiring a lot of other parents who want to protect their kids and maybe just need a little bit of a nudge in the encouragement department, or kind of some framework for how to do it. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Of course. All right, folks. Well, it appears that there is still classical liberalism within the United States, and there still are some very moderate Democrats within the Democrat Party. Joe Manchin is one. Of course, he's really invoked the ire of a lot of other fellow Democrats, people within his party. He says H.R. 1, now that's the For the People Act that has to deal with voting. He says that this will federalize elections, this bill, and destroy our democracy. And he's getting a lot of pushback. We'll talk with Congressman Andy Biggs from Arizona's 5th Congressional District about that next. Stay with us. Are you ready for the next national disaster? If we have learned one thing at all recently, it's that the unthinkable can happen at any time. And the best way to ensure that you are prepared is to prepare now and not after, with an emergency ration stockpile. I call it my Patriot Pantry of food from My Patriot Supply. They are America's preparedness leader, and they give a lot of people, millions in fact, peace of mind for an uncertain future. But don't wait until it's too late. You have to act before there's civil unrest or stock market crash or, heaven forbid, a natural disaster or worse. My Patriot Supply has served millions of families for over a decade, earning 39,000 4- and 5-star reviews. And their food is specially packaged to stay fresh and delicious for 25 years. And unlike other emergency foods, each meal provides you 2,000 calories, much needed calories, when you need them the most. And if you act now, you'll save 25% on their 4-week emergency food kit. Just visit preparewiththefirst.com today. Save 25% on a valuable 4-week kit. That's preparewiththefirst.com. Congressman Andy Biggs, a Republican from the beautiful state of Arizona, joins us now to talk about H.R. 1, that For the People bill. That's actually not for the people. It's about federalizing elections, an attempt to seize power. I mean, honestly, how else do you put it? It centralizes voting all within Washington, D.C., and it seems Joe Manchin of the Democrat Party, he's going to vote against it. And he's also in opposition to removing the filibuster. We must protect Joe Manchin at all costs. Congressman Biggs is here to give us his take. Congressman, so good to see you. Welcome.
Thanks, Dana. Good to be with you. You know, H.R. 1 is a...
Yeah, go ahead. I have to note that name of it, For the People, it's not for the people. It is not for us. It's not for us.
No, it's against us. It's for the Democratic elite. That's what it's for. They want to keep their party in power. And it does some pretty amazing things that is contrary to about 80% of Americans like voter ID. They want to eliminate voter ID. They want to have mandate mail-in ballots to everybody. And they want to use databases like the federal prison database, so that everybody there's going to get a ballot. They want to do ballot harvesting. Oddly enough, these three things alone are what Jimmy Carter said are the recipe for voter fraud. That's what they seem to want. and they say, oh, it's going to be voter suppression. It's not voter suppression if you require someone to have an ID. And quite frankly, most people can get a voter ID pretty easily, pretty handily, get their ID, go in, and prove who they are.
You have to have one to get a vaccine?
Yeah. To drink or to get on a plane.
Rent
or
a
anything.
car, rent a hotel room, buy tobacco. I mean, do a number of other things. But even more as looking at this, all the insane details, because there's a lot in here. I mean, I don't even understand how they can get this far with this bill, because what they're talking about requires a constitutional amendment. If they're removing from states, and actually not even just removing, penalizing states from trying to maintain accurate voter rolls, which I didn't realize that was something that deserved a penalty. They treat it like it's an offense. They're removing from states that right that was granted to them in the Constitution. It's you have the election clause. It's very well laid out. Why are they even, I can't imagine this making it past any kind of court. Talk to me a little bit about this, because this seems like this is an amendment, not just a piece of legislation that they should push forward.
Well, it's a massive piece of legislation, so some of it would probably require a constitutional amendment, as you say. Other portions, I think we could legislatively take action. But the bottom line is this absolutely undercuts the local and state control of elections. And that's what they want. They want to federalize it, bring power into the center, and make sure that there's only one political party going forward, their own. And they want to make sure that they have power. That is what this is all about. And I don't think it would survive a court challenge in its whole package. They say that, well, we'll just, if that falls, then parts of it we'll get through, et cetera. But the bottom line is they got it through the House because they have more Democrats. They can't get it through the Senate because Joe Manchin says no, and they have the filibuster. So thank goodness for Joe Manchin.
Yeah, I exactly think. Well, he understands. He's West Virginia. I think he's like the only Democrat there. He's more of a moderate. That state went to Trump 68% last election. He's been one of the rare Democrats who's figured out how to live in a deep red state, in a deep red district in the Trump era, which is not an easy task. But you bring up Joe Manchin, talking to Congressman Andy Biggs here. He was called a white supremacist by other actual Democrats. Other commentators have referred to him as such. And I was thinking about this during radio today, Congressman. In a time when we have minority voters that are breaking for the Republican Party at a record not seen since Nixon, it seems a little suspect to me that now Democrats want to remove from the states these same voters' ability to rectify any kind of situation with either their voting rolls or anything else, and they want to centralize at the Democrat Party, all in Washington, D.C. To me, that's where the bigotry is. Your thoughts?
I'm with you all the way. I think the term racist, white supremacist, domestic terrorist, they're also overblown today. And I think most Americans realize that, and they just flush it down the toilet, because most Americans are common sense people. We're still a center-right nation. And you know what? People understand that the franchise, the vote, is so sacred to give it up to Washington, D.C., which is so far away from us and has screwed up so much of what every American feels in their lives. Inflation, we sense that going up. It just doesn't make sense. And so when they say that, I think it adds to the problem for them, because voter ID, for instance, that's an 80% issue of Americans support voter ID, of all demographics, of all races, genders, et cetera. That's it. And they're out there going to call names because they think that works. It doesn't work anymore.
Yeah, to put this bill to kind of to reduce it down in terms that people can understand. For instance, I discovered last election that we had someone who is illegally registered to vote at my home address. And it's not as easy as one might think to get somebody removed if they are illegally registered to vote at your address. And I discovered this because they sent this person a ballot to my house. They sent it to my house. I looked on the website, I ran it down, I learned everything I could about, how this could happen. Now, if something like H.R. 1's passed, I can go to my local, the election board in my county, but if H.R. 1's passed, I wouldn't have that recourse anymore. I don't even know where to even begin if all of this is centralized in Washington, D.C. So basically it's some bureaucrat that's thousands of miles away from where I live that I would have to go to and hope that they have time to hear me and correct it?
Yeah, probably somebody in a cubicle who hopes to retire as a government official because it's an easy lifestyle. I mean, the bottom line is I still get ballots at my place from some of my grown children, and we've tried to get them off the voter rolls for years. And this would stop that, and you couldn't clean up the voter rolls. They want to stop you from cleaning up the voter rolls.
I bet, you know what, Congressman, I bet if you tell your Democrat colleagues across the aisle, well, you know, since I'm getting these ballots, I'm going to go ahead, we're going to vote for them, and then they can vote also in their area. Just be open and honest about cheating. And then I'm sure that you'll see some quick action about how Arizona's got to clean up its voter rolls. Look at Congressman Biggs cheating with the voting. How quickly do you think that they would react to that?
They'd go pretty quick, I tell you that.
That for sure. One other quick thing to ask you about this, because actually I lied. There's two other things to ask you about this, because it's not just the centralization of voting. From what I understand in reading the legislation, taxpayers are going to be on the hook to actually pay for political campaigns, which sounds like a great expense here in this post-pandemic economy when everyone's trying to keep a roof over their head. And then to make Washington, D.C. itself either recognize it as its own state entity or something, which again, that's one of the things that you referenced that would require constitutional amendment. Why should taxpayers even pay for these campaigns? This is a nutty proposition.
No, that's exactly right. We actually have some form of it in Arizona. It hasn't worked real well, in my opinion. But this is even going to go overboard because it's going to be, I think it's 6-1. I think the match is 6-1. So you raise $200 and the federal government's going to give you $1,200. Imagine that. And most of my donations are small donors. They're going to give small amounts, and I'll be able to multiply that massively. And what that does, that will protect an incumbent far better than it's going to allow a challenger to come after me. And that's a huge problem. And it's not to mention, I just don't understand how, that doesn't violate the First Amendment. You're forcing me and coercing me to associate, and especially with Citizens United saying that money in campaigns is speech. How is that not a violation of free speech? You're forcing taxpayers to give money to people they would never support.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. On the issue of Washington, D.C., I actually never thought I would see it, Congressman, but I saw a Democrat commentator actually invoke the Second Amendment as the reason for why Washington, D.C. should be its own state. Because if you live in D.C., technically because it's not a state, you can't make a purchase like that. And I thought, well, then couldn't they just be re-annexed back into, I think, Virginia? Couldn't that work But even more so, it can't be its own state because it's supposed to be subject to the restraint and the rules of the state. Like the states administer it. That would put it on par with the rest of the. That's not how it's set up to work, and you can't do it without an amendment.
No, you're exactly right, but that isn't what they want. See, they want the electoral votes, and they want the majority in the Senate because they know that is what votes like 96% Democrat, right? So they want to get a couple of new senators, get another congressman or woman, and then they want to be able to have control with that. That's what it's about.
Yeah, they have Eleanor Norton Holmes, I believe, is DC's rep. But you're right; they'd love to be able to have that senator or a senator rather, and another representative, which. That's just not how the system is supposed to work. Let me ask you this last question for you, Congressman Andy Biggs. Appreciate your time with us. I don't, because it almost seems like it was on purpose designed to fail, but at least get people kind of an Overton window sort of strategy, but at least get people comfortable with just enough, right? Just enough. So maybe they don't do the DC statehood right away, but maybe they can get this through if they piecemeal it, if it's rejected and they have to redo it. If it does end up that that's the strategy, what do you think, if it's broken apart, what do you think actually might be the one thing that you're worried about that could theoretically, realistically pass in both House and Senate?
Well, I am worried about the mail-in ballot scheme. I think that there's been a lot of push for that, and the opposition is always voter suppression. So if that were to get through, though, that would change probably forever United States elections. And so there's possible that might get through. I would pray that it wouldn't, but right now I'm confident. I feel good that most of the stuff that would be in there would not draw very many Republicans over, at least not enough Republicans to pass in the Senate.
Oh, I hope not. I hope not any at all. Congressman Andy Biggs, appreciate your time with us. Good to see you again. I'm sure we'll be talking again soon. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks, Dana.
All right, coming up, folks. So Crayola crayons, I like the ones that smell. Do you remember those? Or I remember those. The strawberry one, the red one that was the fuchsia one that was strawberry when I was in elementary school. So good. You know, now they're coming in even more colors. This time, actually skin colors, right? So they have a whole package where it's just about that. Good, bad, or maybe a good thing, but too much marketing weirdness. We'll talk about that when we return. Keep it here. So to wrap today up, something caught my attention from Crayola. It is their new Colors of the World markers, and they come in various skin tones that represent people from around the world. Now, I want to say, like up front, that this is not something to get riled up about. At least that's my opinion. I mean, it's not like Crayola has ever been particularly good at capturing anybody's skin tone in the past. Like, right? That's one thing that we have all had in common, no matter where you come from. No one had a color in the Crayola box, marker or crayon, where it was you, right? There's some colors in there that lets kids make people that look like people and not aliens from another planet. There's never been anything. We've all been on the struggle bus. So again, it all seems good for the most part. But the question really for me is, why not just throw these colors into the regular pack and not make a huge, super focused thing about it? And here's why I'm saying that. America's current obsession with race is not healthy. And it is especially not healthy when we impose this hyper obsession with race on our kids. When seen as part of a larger effort to make our kids color conscious, it's worrying because we're teaching our kids, and we as a society are looking at everything through the lens of race, right? All across the country, schools are embracing curriculums that put race at the center of everything. Critical race theory, offshoot of Marxism, that argues that race transcends all other factors and is indeed the most important thing about people. But we know that's a lie. How? I mean, see, we could learn a lot from our kids about race, namely, that when we are at our best, we stop seeing race, and instead, we see the person. We see the soul, right? That's it. Critical race theory advocates will tell you that it's impossible, that we all see color, and we should teach our kids from the earliest ages to see color too. I entirely disagree with that. And while it's true that as we grow up and we lose our innocence, we see color, we see a lot of stuff, and really, honestly, we believe that the way forward is still the way that Martin Luther King so eloquently stated, to judge people by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. That's still the highest ideal that's ever been spoken about race relations. See, it's not that we don't see color or that our kids won't one day see color too. It's the aspiration that we should make every effort to see beyond it, to go deeper and see the person, to see the reflection of the Creator in everybody. That's the goal. We don't accomplish that by being hyper-obsessive about color and re-racializing America. And we don't do that by segregating ourselves again, or by telling the next generation that the most important thing about their coworker, their neighbor, or their best buddy is their skin color, or telling our kids that some people's skin color makes them victims and other people's color makes them oppressors. That's called stereotyping. And we must, if America is to survive, reject that. To be sure, skin color is it's just part of every person's life, and it adds something to everybody. And that's some new Crayola's color better. I mean, that they reflect that. I think that's a good thing. I mean, honestly, everybody's been on that struggle bus. There's never been a good color to color people when you have been working on an art school project. But let's not forget that we also have to teach our kids what truly makes somebody awesome is something far more important than color. It's who they are. What's their character like? What's their soul like? What's their heart like? That does it for tonight, folks, and we will see you back here tomorrow. Good night, and don't bend the knee.